Welcome. I'm Jessica Tietjen, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. I think it's interesting. In my view, the space has been pretty stagnant for a long time, and it's kind of ripe for maybe a revamp of what could a better approach to compensation and benefits look like. And I think one of the things that could be really valuable is looking at it through the lens of what's going to positively impact the people as well as the work. So what are the things that people need or would benefit from? And then how do you bring those two things together in an effective way?
Well, I agree. I mean, meeting your employee needs is part of that, right? Yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so everybody's at a different spot on those tiers, but being able to offer options is how you're going to attract and retain people. And where people are in their lives, their needs are going to change. My needs are going to be different than your needs. Do I have kids that are young kids in middle school, or are they in college, or are they off on their own now? They're off the payroll and supporting themselves. So those needs are definitely going to change throughout an employee's their career life, and being able to have options for them, I think, is desirable. I agree with you that there's opportunity for something different. Here we could use something different, but especially when you come to the healthcare side of things, the medical insurance and dental insurance, and that there's really not a lot that we can do or that's available right now that would be different than what we've been doing. Big love to see some different options. I have seen in a demo from a broker an option where they're not necessarily going to see a doctor or a physician in a particular medical group. So that's what you might traditionally have with a PPO plan. You pull up the app, you say you need to go see I'm going to go see a gastroenterologist. So you take that in, it pulls all them all up in your area and what it's going to cost you under that plan to go see those. So everybody's covered under the plan, but going to different doctors, you might be paying different rates.
Interesting.
And I think it takes your culture would have to be ripe for something like that too, right? Like the culture we have here, everybody is very traditional in the sense of benefits. So that would never work for my organization, but it was very intriguing to see. And I would love to see this explode out in the marketplace and to see more options like that come about, because I think that puts more of the purchase power of the healthcare in the employee's hands. Yeah. And it should help drive down costs, and especially costs for the employer and costs for the employee.
Well, and I think one of the things that's important here is that when it comes especially to what motivates people or demotivates people, that compensation is a very small degree of a motivating factor. So there is some degree of motivation tied to bonuses and unique compensation models, but it's not huge. Even in the sales space, there's been a lot of studies to show that it's really not the primary driver. There's other drivers involved. But it's definitely a huge demotivator when people perceive that their compensation or their benefits are unfair, insufficient, or unequal in some way, that others are getting more of the pie than they deserve. So going back to your comment about if everybody's getting a 3% increase and the feeling of, but I'm doing more work than that person's doing, and that's not really fair. And so that ends up being kind of a drain or more of a disengaging type of approach. And I think sometimes we create everything the same in order to avoid that risk, right? So if everybody's getting the same thing, then it's not, well, how come this person gets this and I don't? And one of the benefits an organization I was in the past had was as needed personal time. So there was no set amount of personal time hours. It was as needed. If you needed to go to the doctor, you took personal time. If you needed to take a day off because you were sick, you took personal time. And there was no set amount of time. If you needed it, you got it. And everybody outside the organization would always ask me, do people abuse that? And interestingly, no, they never did. That people, when given that amount of flexibility, they really appreciated it. But there were some people who would say, well, it's not fair. People with kids take so much more time off than I take off. And there was like this frustration because people are at different phases of life, but they don't necessarily realize that at some point they may be in that situation or they might have a challenge. And so it does get into, you do get into some unique conversations there.
Yeah, I've never experienced a unlimited PTO policy or anything like that. But people tend, you read about the articles and that people tend to not use it when they have more of it. And that's true for us here. We have a pretty generous time off policy. With the recent law changes here in Missouri, we had to split our PTO into two buckets for sick and vacation. But we would had people who were getting 5 weeks or so, 6 weeks off for that. But they never use it. They would never use it. They might use half of it. And some people are complaining that they had too much time off, which is odd. I've never experienced that before, but it's interesting. And I wonder too, how much that has to do with the different generations. The boomers, the Gen X grew up with, everything was about work, work. You go to work when you're sick, you don't take time off, those kinds of things. That's kind of how I was brought up with, my parents did it but the younger generations, are they going to act the same? Or are they going to expect more time off coming in, right? In my organization, we have a big generational gap here. We still have boomers on the payroll, and we have a lot of Gen Xers, but we have very few millennials, but we're starting to get more of the Gen Zs in now. And so we're kind of heavier on the two, and a big dip in the middle of that. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how those younger generations come through, because if any articles you read, they expect to have that work-life balance.
Yeah.
Different. And I should say, not that expecting it is wrong, right? I mean, we all want that, but I think it's a different expectation than what the older generations had going in, right? Yeah. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, as those generations grow up in the workplace, how is that going to impact things? Are they going to have that more expectation of having more time off?
And what's interesting, I should say, with that personal time, there was also vacation. So those were split. So there was set vacation, you got vacation, you were expected to take vacation, you were encouraged to take your vacation, but personal time wasn't part of that. So if you got sick, if you had to go to the doctor, that didn't cut into vacation time. So people would still get to go on vacation, even if they got the flu for a week, or if they got knocked down or things like that. But I think one of the things that you talked about there is important. So one of the things I think that's interesting is when we think about time off and some of these benefits and this whole mindset or mentality is it's all time based, right? So it's how many hours, how much time. And I think one of the things that's really shifted and maybe impacting this generational difference is that work is not so much time based. So the things that we're doing are not universally taking the same amount of time for everyone. So maybe in the past, we're generally a task or a particular role or this many hours you'd accomplish or produce this many widgets or this much work or whatever. And now, especially with AI, things that were quantifiable before might be, something that might have taken 4 days might take 3 hours. You might be able to really condense or change what you're doing. And so I think what has become challenging, and I think what certainly millennials and Gen Z especially are bringing up a lot, is this idea of, are you paying me for what I accomplish, or are you paying me for how many hours I'm sitting at a computer working for you? And I know of some Gen Z, maybe borderline millennial, I don't know, somewhere in there, folks who are actively working 2 jobs full time, right? The organizations have no idea because what they're producing is of such high quality that they're the strongest performer. but they're clearly not putting in 40 hours into two jobs and working them. They're just producing that amount of work in that amount of time. And so I think there's a lot of discussion when it comes to compensation, especially when you talk about minimum wage and hourly wages and the different types of work that people do. How do we think about work? Is work how many hours I'm giving to you dedicated to my machine, my production, my whatever I'm doing for you? Or is it what I'm producing? Is the impact that I'm having? Is it the outcome that I'm achieving? Because there's a whole lot of people in organizations who spend a lot of time at their machines, right? Email's a great example. You could spend your whole life doing email and get absolutely nothing accomplished.
Yes. Yeah. I had days like that myself.
I mean, and it's frustrating. You're like, gosh, I didn't get any real work done. So you can fill the hours, you can fill the time and not produce anything for an organization or for a business.
Oh, you're right. And I think you're raising a great point. And this is something that I've thought about too. It kind of bringing around the regulations, her employment laws, how outdated are they? And there's been pushes in the recent past to increase the amount of people that are eligible for overtime, but the jobs don't necessarily support that. You're still tying that person down to a chair and behind a desk. And if the work isn't there to support that, we're in a global economy. You've got, particularly after COVID, all the flexibility to be able to do many jobs remotely. You don't have to sit in an office. Why can't it be more work-based instead of hourly-based? And now I don't know the full answer to that, but I think that's probably where it needs to go. And when these younger generations coming up and the bigger interest to gig work and that, I mean, there's the desire to call your own shots there. It doesn't fit in with the regulations that are around today. And I think that there could be, although it'll probably small, but there will probably be some kind of conflict that's going to come up for organizations if the younger generations are wanting this. I've seen that here in our industry, where with being a creative agency, we have our core group employees, but we also freelance work for our increases in work and as everything ebbs and flows. And the people that are doing that freelance work, they don't want to work full time for an organization. They're working full time doing their own thing. There are independent contractors. Some of them have their own small little companies doing that, right? But they're calling the shots. They're working when they want to work. They're working on what they want to work. And that's what drives them.
Well, and I think it's almost the difference between what is the type of relationship. So is the relationship between the employee and the organization transactional, where I am paying you this amount of money for this amount of hours or work, whichever is a transaction and exchange, or is there more depth to it? So if it's transactional, then why wouldn't I want to be gig? Why wouldn't I want to charge for, this is the thing I'm going to deliver. You're going to pay me this much for it. Now I'm motivated to do it in the most effective and efficient and productive way that I can, because it's either going to take me more or less hours, but this is what I'm going to deliver to you. So this is what it's worth to me. And then I take care of myself, right? I give myself the time off that I need. I choose how I overwork or don't overwork. I choose the benefits I give myself as a result of that. Or is an organization truly treating their people holistically? And if they do that well around all the things we're talking about, of compensation and benefits and paying attention to where people are in their lives and what their needs are, and looking at that holistically, then maybe it isn't so transactional. Then maybe it can become about what are we creating together and how are we working together to achieve that. But it takes a genuine interest in the leadership, certainly of the organization, and the culture of the organization, valuing both the impact on people and the impact on the business, and putting in place practices that both create outcomes for both. And I'm not sure there's a lot of organizations, and I'm not even criticizing anyone in particular, I just don't think a lot of organizations have made that shift yet. It's still pretty transactional.
Oh, I agree, definitely. And you got to look at the industry too, right? I mean, what's common in that industry, and thinking forward instead of it works for us, why do we need to change? I mean, there's You got to look at what's coming in the future. You mentioned AI. That's a new technology that's coming out, right? How does that going to benefit us as an organization? Because it's not going to go away. But you got to look at that in the workforce too. And what are the desires and the needs of the younger workforce coming in going to need? And how are we going to adjust to attract them and to retain them? And that work-life balance does now become part of the compensation package. If it's given them that flexibility to do what they want or what they need to do in the middle of the day.
Yeah. I think when we say work-life balance, what popped into my mind when you were saying that was, I think with the new generation, and I'm not a Gen Z, so I can't, I'm speaking out of turn here, but I wonder a bit if it's not so much about balance, it's that they want different things. And so earlier generations, certainly the boomers, compensation, achievement, getting ahead was a huge part of that cultural norm. And I think what we're seeing is maybe more breakage in terms of what's important to people and what really matters to people, and whether it is career success, higher compensation, and maybe more diversification into time for my hobbies, time for fun, time for my health, time to regulate my nervous system. I used to be in 8-hour back-to-back meetings, and it was one of the things that put me in extreme burnout, was pushing my body that hard. And so some of that, I think it's diversification of what's important. It's not necessarily that work is no longer important. It's just that there's more things that are now at the same level as our careers.
I agree with that 100%. And I think that balance is more about flexibility
Yeah.
to do what's important to them when it's important. Health is important. I need to take 2 hours. I need to go to the doctor today. I want to go on a daily walk in the middle of the day, whatever. I think that's more the importance than necessarily working less. I don't think that's what they're looking for. I don't think well, of course, we'd all like to work less, but I don't think that's generally what we're looking for out of it. It's more of being able to do what I need to do, what I want to do when I need to do it, not having to work around a 8 or 10-hour schedule that I have to dedicate this block of time to that group. And then I have to have an hour of drive time. And then I have to give my kids this much time. And my spouse, I have to give this much time.
Well, and I think, especially kind of bringing it back around to compensation, that when I certainly feel this way, and I'm right now in the kind of more contractor gig space, is I miss the culture. I miss the community, that we're in this together. We're all on the same boat. We're all rowing together. And if you have a really positive company culture, if you have a really positive set of practices and ways in which people interact, and they have relationships with one another, compensation becomes less important. And so compensation becomes more about honoring your skill set and what it is you deliver and what it is you provide. And if people are compensated fairly, like, they don't necessarily have to make the top of what they could possibly make. Like, I've had this conversation, and so is my husband, we have little kids, and he's in the sales space, and there's so many jobs that he gets offered for really high compensation dollars, but it's 25 to 50% travel. And he's like, no, I'm not going to be gone 25% of the time. I'm just not going to do that. And so he takes a cut. He says it's not worth $250,000, $300,000 to be gone 50% of the time. Like, that's too much. It's not worth it. And for some people, it might be worth it, right? For some people, that might be great, but for us in our family, it wouldn't work. And so I think when it comes to compensation, we have to look at it in that broader context, right? In that broader picture, and look at the cultures that you're building, because people don't leave. People will stay in lower paying jobs longer if they like the people and the culture that they're working in. They won't leave just for money. It'll take more to get them to go away. But if they're unhappy and they're offered a little bit more, it's a quick decision to move on. It's a quick decision to take that new job.
Right. And, the culture is definitely a big key. And it's not something that I would consider to be part of the compensation package, because that's the intrinsic value that you get out of the job. And being valued, number one, I like how you said honoring instead of valuing an individual. And that's a good way to view the compensation. But But the culture is a huge component into retaining employees and their value and what you're offering them, not just in that culture, but in development opportunities, getting to work on things that they enjoy to do, giving them those opportunities to grow, expand, um, stretch themselves, right? Those are all the things that are going to keep employees in place. And it's not just a one thing. There's got to be a mix of them. It doesn't have to be everything, but there definitely does need to be a mix of them. Because the people, if they're not happy, they're going to leave for whatever the reason. It doesn't have to be more money. It could just be better opportunities. It could be working on different kinds of projects, whatever. They're going to leave for those opportunities, and you could be throwing all the money in the world at them, and if you're not giving them the development opportunity that they want, they're going to leave.
Well,
Just
and
like
I
in
think,
your example.
yeah, and I think that's like such a powerful example, right? Because oftentimes we skirt on meaningful development, right? Giving people the training and the true coaching or the true support that they need. But then organizations will invest in benefits like employee lunches and happy hours and mindfulness apps or, something along. And I'm not knocking those things. Those things are great. And also, how much are they really tied to or having a positive impact on people? And every organization has an EIP. They have notoriously low utilization rates. I think that's almost their whole business model is, sell it for not a crazy cost, but nobody uses it, so it's okay. But because nobody uses it, people don't get the benefit of it, and they
Right.
don't really get the impact of it except in pretty crisis or specific circumstances. So I think there's a lot of space in this area to really get creative and look at it through a new lens, look at it through what really motivates people, what's truly important to them. We're not motivated by our minds, we're motivated by our hearts. Our hearts are what we connect with, our values, what's important to us. And a lot of times I think we make evaluative decisions about compensation and benefits that are very head based. People should want these things. People should be motivated by this. And frankly, we know by now that the human body does not operate based on what we should do. Humans make illogical decisions all of the time. Like, we should take a walk and not sit on our phones and scroll. And yet people do that all the time. So we're not always going to make rational decisions. And so when we think about compensation and benefits, we need to not just think about it from a rational view, but we need to really be in touch with the heart space and the heart intelligence and those neural networks that drive what's important to both the company and people.
100%. I couldn't said it better myself.
Well, Jeff, this has been such a great conversation. I think we could go for much, much longer. I want to give you a chance, though, to maybe give any final thoughts you have about this topic or anything we've talked about today as we kind of wrap this up.
As a final thought, you mentioned development, and we kind of were wrapping up there on that. And that, comes down to culture and support. And it's not just through HR support. It's not just through leadership support. It really comes down to managers and providing that learning environment. Managers being more of a coach than a leader and giving the employees those opportunities for the development, those opportunities to stretch themselves and try to align. It's on the manager to align what those employees' needs and wants are, what their desires are, how they want to grow to the organization's objectives, right? Because it needs to work out for the organization as well. But the employees need to own that conversation. The managers need to guide that conversation with the employees and then find those opportunities for the employees. And that's what's going to keep them around.
I love that. I think that's incredibly insightful and powerful and often missing.
Yeah, we get wrapped up in the day-to-day quite easily. So
Yeah, and rightfully so. I think that's an important point is that our brains and bodies are wired to pay attention to the things that are in the short term, to deal with the crisis that's right in front of us, to check the thing off the list because it makes us feel good. It gives us the dopamine hit right now. And so our bodies have a tendency, and brains, our neural networks have a tendency to dismiss and delay growth opportunities because they are not going to give us the same immediate motivation, the immediate dopamine and neurobiological hit that completing another task, sending another email, finishing a project or something we're working on will give us. And so it actually takes some work to shift the body and to help support people in doing so, to really integrate development and have development be something for leaders, for managers, for people that they're thinking about on a regular basis. Well, thank you so, so much for coming on, Jeff. I appreciate your time so much. To all of our listeners, I just want to remind you to just always keep evolving, keep growing, keep rewiring those neural pathways so that you can live your best life, an exceptional life. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll be back again next week with another episode.